Hey, what is up, guys? It is Michael Kristy. I'm here with Jeanne Flynn, and I'm doing a feature film called Paint the Eyes First, where the lead character of the film is a 19-year-old homeless addict that is looking for a place to stay for the winter, and he ends up befriending a young janitor and his wife, and they all stay in a music conservatory by day or by night, and at daytime they run out and leave, and they start to live there and develop a family. But one of the biggest things about the film is I want to raise awareness about addiction, and particularly heroin, because that's the drug that will be dealt with in the film. And I have a very special and wonderful guest here today, Jeanne Flynn. Jeanne is extremely inspirational, always positive, and I would just love to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions, hear your story, and we'll go from there.
All right.
So can we get a little brief story from you?
Sure. My son Brian was raised in the town of Sandwich, and we had a great life here. Lived downtown, walked to school, involved with sports, loved his baseball, loved so much about everything that he did around here in town. As time went on, he had a broken collarbone in a snowboarding accident. And I want to say he was probably about the age of 13 or 14. And, they treated his pain with Vicodin. And that was, I think, the first time that he felt what it was like and how it made him feel somewhat of a normal, a comfortable spot. Not a crazy high, but a comfortable spot. And it's very potentially that it was ADHD that might have made him get into that kind of a mode. Oftentimes that's what happens with anybody who was taking a drug of some sort. But it didn't develop immediately, but eventually he did end up with an addiction problem. And we had a very hard time understanding it, because when you are the parent of somebody who's afflicted with this, you first feel that it is a shameful thing, because you wonder, why are they doing this? How are they doing this? This isn't how we raise them. But it's not about that. The truth of the matter is we've come to understand that it is a disease that infiltrates and basically hijacks the brain.
Right.
So we did have a bit of a struggle for a number of years. We really tried so many different things to try to help him. As parents, that's what we do. We help our children, and we want to be there for them to get them on to the next stage of life. But truth of the matter is, with this, you cannot create you did not create the situation. You can't cure it.
Right.
So you try to do what you can to change it. But ultimately, it was a very big struggle. And when they say that this is a family disease, there's no question about it. It is. So we went through many different situations with him, whether it was a detox or, treatment. There were a number of issues that we went through to try to help get him to the next level.
Right.
I began to learn an awful lot about it by going to a support group. And that support group is Parents Supporting Parents, which still meets in Mashpee once a week on Monday nights. And I felt like I got like a degree in addiction by having spent so much time with other people, peers of my own, that were dealing with the same issues on their children. We traded stories, we gave advice, we learned different things. People would come in to speak about their situation, whether they're on the treatment end of things or whether they were people who had been through it themselves and maybe on the other side of things. So we learned a lot. And I think if anybody had ever told me back then the road we would take, I would have thought they were crazy. I am going to tell you that truth is far stranger than fiction, because you can't make these stories up. You really can't.
Yeah.
So he went to Florida a couple of times. We took him off to do rapid detoxes so it would help speed the process along. Ultimately, it's up to the individual.
Right.
It's a very difficult thing to get a shovel big enough to dig yourself out of the hole when you feel like you've got nothing to offer, or you feel like you've got nothing going for you, because this is what happens when somebody gets into the full-fledgedness of the addiction. It changes who they are, and they don't purposely turn their attitude that way. It's the craving from the body combined with the mind having gone into a different kind of realm with the opiate receptors that are within the head. It's something that you learn over time. I learned it over time, because believe me, I thought he had a choice.
Right. And a lot of people that don't know think that too.
They do. They still do.
Right.
And so totally, I'm going to tell you this. If they had a choice, if they could just stop it, people say, tell them, just stop. If they could just stop, we wouldn't have an epidemic, would we?
Exactly, not at all.
No. So it didn't happen that way. And he had come back from a treatment place in Texas. He had come back in December of 2014. He came back, he found his spirituality, everything that had happened to him while he was down there changed his whole being. He came back and he was happy as could be. He was committed as could be. He did meetings regularly. He would get up and speak, and I think he inspired a lot of people. I did come to find out. He was, I always say, he gave me the gift of 100 days. He was 100 days clean. He was the old Brian. He was the Brian that we raised. He was the Brian that we knew and loved. And a friend of his died from an overdose. And that is the point where somebody who is struggling, because once an addict, always an addict, you always struggle. Even if you look like you're as calm and cool as can be. What I've understood from people who do suffer from this is that it's always a struggle within.
Right.
So a friend of his died, and he could have gone one way or the other. He could have committed more totally to the sobriety, or fell off the fence. So unfortunately, relapse seems to be a part of this whole scene of substance use disorder, as they call it. And when he fell off, he struggled again, and he went into detox once, came back out, broke his wrist while he was snowboarding. Had to try to figure out how he was going to survive with or without pain meds.
Right.
And it was very, very painful. The doctor told him it was going to be. It was a bad break with all the knuckles. And so he did take the pain meds, and he said, boy, as soon as this is starting to subside, I'm going right back into detox. And he did. And he came out, and he was ready to go to a sober house in 2 nights. We had a great conversation this particular night about what his goals were and what he was going to do. And I saw commitment in him and the desire to do well and proceed. And the next morning I went out for a baby shower, and he knew where I was going, but he texted me at 2:54 and asked where I was. And I said, I think you've forgotten that I'm at the baby shower, I'm going grocery shopping, I'll be home. And I did. And when I got home, I found him, and he was gone. And was I totally surprised? No, because it's something that you live with. You know that you are playing with the devil, and you don't know from day to day if this is going to be a success story or not. And fortunately, I knew what we were up against now, and it was bigger than us, and it happened. Now, he had told me the month before that he had overdosed 17 times, and I am well aware of some of them because I did bring him back with Narcan on one of the times. He said to me that point in time, Mom, I have no idea why I have overdosed 17 times and I'm still here. Some of my friends have OD'd one time and they died. But God must have a purpose for me. And so we really began to think, and he was so committed to staying sober. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't meant to be. Now, meanwhile, my husband had been struggling for 2 years with lung cancer, and we knew where that was going. And I had to break the news to him. At this point, he was living in a hospice ward at the Brockton VA, and I had to make the trip up there to break the news. And I was afraid to tell him because he and Brian were so close. And he thought momentarily and he said, I always thought this day would come, because believe me, mm-hmm. in a family situation, we've seen it all too often.
Right.
He said, he's at peace now. And you know, I thought, if this man who knows he's on his way to meet his maker mm-hmm. can feel this way, I've got to ride on his boat. I have got to be with him to feel that we have to believe this is what will bring us peace. We will commit in our heads to the fact, such sadness. This was our only child.
Right.
Gone.
Mm-hmm.
But he's at peace.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I think I find my strength. For me to curl up in a ball and stay at home and cry, what good is that going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I did lose Arthur. 54 days later, in fact.
Wow.
But I guess of the three of us, I'm the one that's left.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to say why. And I think because I've found my faith again, and my faith tells me that I have a purpose here. So whatever that purpose is, I'm willing to try to work to find out, because Brian has no voice anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to be his voice.
Right. Crazy story, and how strong you are to go through all of this too.
I don't know where the strength comes from, except that I've always been kind of a strong person, but I think having found my faith again, mm-hmm. because, you know, I got to tell you, living through this whole thing, you kind of do lose faith.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's always hope.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a very small string, but there's always hope.
Yeah.
And so I think I hung on with hope for as long as I could, and then, you know, when I lost both of my boys inside of 2 months, I said, I've got to turn to have faith now, because I have to have faith. For me to survive and get along, I have to have faith that the right thing, that or whatever was supposed to happen, happened.
Yeah.
I could argue it and scream.
Mm-hmm.
What is it going to get me?
Right.
They're still where they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to bring them back.
Right.
So.
I just remember the first time we met at Lambert's. We were talking. Didn't know what to know. I didn't know anything about you. I didn't know what you were like or anything like that. And you were texting me, or you called me or something like that. And you were like, "Well, I go for a walk, then I go to church, then I can meet you, but then I have to go to a meeting at, I think, 11. So I have about an hour and a half with you. Then I'm going to go to Virginia next week. So a little packed and busy." And I was like, wow, okay. And then we get up to Lambert's, and there's a spot that we had our breakfast at, and we talked. And I was just blown away by how well-spoken you are, how positive, how bright. And it was a super interesting conversation. It was amazing to talk to you and learn about all this.
Thanks.
And one of the things that we did talk about that personally I never thought of, or even really, I guess thought of is the best way to say it, but just you kind of gave me the story of how you kept it inside for a long time, and then you let it out. And I think that's so important, the story of you telling people and like letting it be public, because right now I feel like it's such a sheltered thing, and you can't really make too much progress when you're trying to put everything under the rug and hide it. Yeah.
Right. I will first say that I knew before anybody left that house that day, medical examiner, EMTs, cops, anybody, I knew in my heart that the first thing that was going to go in that obituary was to explain that he didn't just die suddenly. He was dying for years from his addiction, because that is what happens with this. I tried to hide it for quite a long time, and I think most people do. You know, it's kind of one of those things where you don't want anybody to affiliate the fact that you're feeling like your child might be a failure. Maybe you as a parent are looked at like you were a failure, but the truth of the matter is, this is a disease. This is something that infiltrates the brain, and nobody looks at other diseases and says, oh, forget you. You know, someone has a heart attack and you see them eating a cheeseburger. Are you going to tell them that you don't even want to talk to them?
Right.
But this feels like it has shame to it. And I think things are beginning to change. I think the tide is beginning to turn. Lord knows it should. Do you realize how many people died in the Vietnam War? Like about 59,000? That's about the average number of people we lose to this disease across the country in a year.
Wow.
Somebody comes with Ebola into the country. One person, the whole country shuts down. Everybody runs to figure out how are we going to tackle this. And it's gotten to the point where, oh, another one to OD? Okay, pass the salt, please. That's really where it's come. But in the early days, we kept the hope that it would be a college education. Now you're hoping, geez, a GED. You're thinking, a great job. Now you're hoping, geez, can you at least get a menial job at minimum wage, you know? Can you be useful? And it's a shame, but you know, you begin to lower your expectations, unfortunately. And believe me, nobody wakes up saying, or goes through early school saying, I want to be an addict when I grow up.
Oh, of course.
They have great goals and imaginations, but things begin to change. So in the early days, we had hope that things were going to change, just we didn't understand what this really was all about. But as we began to realize it wasn't, I would try to ignore the situation as far as people, outside people knowing. And I would go to the grocery store and I would skip this aisle because there's someone that I knew that had someone doing very well in college, or I'd skip the next aisle because I knew this person was going to say, how's Brian doing? And I didn't want to have to tell him. And I didn't want to have to lie. And you know, the joke of it was I'd come home with half the grocery list saying, sorry, I wasn't going up those aisles. So, you know, if you want to go shopping and hope that those aisles are open, go ahead. But I just wasn't going to deal with it today. So the group that I had begun to attend, this Parent Supporting Parents in Mashpee, the first year, the lady that ran it wanted to do a candlelight vigil in Hyannis and wanted it to focus on those that we have lost and people in recovery and those that are still struggling, and be all-encompassing and do a candlelight vigil with, you know, a little bit of music and a little bit of speakers and everything. And she wanted it to be focused on getting the word out. So one of our most tried and true folks from the Cape Cod Times, Casey Myers, she has been covering this subject for many years, and she's got a wonderful sense of empathy, and she really puts a story out there as it should be put out there. And she was doing an interview with Lisa Murphy, who was the one that founded this PSP group. And Lisa asked me, would you come down and do the interview with me? And I looked at my boys, I looked at my husband and my son, and I said, if I do this with Lisa, there's probably going to be names in the paper. There's probably going to be pictures in the paper. I said, how do you feel about that? And they both said, go for it. So I had their blessing, and I said, all right, I'll go down. And yes, there was names in the paper. Yes, there were photos in the paper of Lisa and I sitting there giving the interview. And boy, I got to tell you, I held my breath because I thought, here it comes. now I'm going to go in the grocery store and I'll probably be able to do every aisle because people will see me and say, I ain't talking to that one because, you know, she's got problems. It was so different.
Mm-hmm.
More people came up to me and said, me too.
Mm-hmm.
My kid too. How are you doing it? What do we do? And it was such an outpouring, such a stroke of different expectation.
Right, definitely.
And all of a sudden, I felt uplifted to think that I knew I wasn't alone, but there's a lot of people out there that won't admit it.
Yeah.
They feel shame, they feel failure, and this sort of changed the face of everything.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And as that changed the face of everything, all of a sudden, I had a lot of new friends.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a club I would ever want to belong to, or I would ever
Right.
want to convince anybody else to belong to.
Mm-hmm.
But I have more friends, valued friendships of people who have walked this path with me that I could have ever imagined.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I had a lot of friends prior to Brian's death.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have a bigger circle of people because now I have a circle of other parents that have lost. And you know, not everybody understands. Somebody might lose someone to a car accident,
Mm-hmm.
any number of things. And that type of a death is so different than somebody who has struggled. We have lived with this family disease, and we have struggled to try to pray and hope that they could see their way to getting sober, staying sober, finding meaning in life. And there's quite a difference, I think, when somebody dies from that for the folks that are left behind. Because we're kind of torn between what could we have done different?
Mm-hmm.
We did as much as we could do.
Right, yeah.
For the most part, most of us shouldn't have any guilt because most of us have really done as much as we can. Some people do it with tough love,
Mm-hmm.
and they send them out. Some people have a hard time defining between enabling and not,
Mm-hmm.
and what is helping, what is hurting. So some people, when they lose a loved one to an overdose, to addiction, heroin, fentanyl, they're left with that question mark.
Mm-hmm.
And the part that I feel Brian was cheated out of was the fact that he never really got to live a normal life of goals and expectation because this got him in his grips at such a young age.
Right, right.
So stigma is still an issue.
Yeah, and I think just to even, we talked about this, I don't want to name names or anything like that, but I know you said other people that you spoke to that kept that secret in, wouldn't tell anybody. Once they did say it, or if they were on something or gave an interview or something like that,
Yeah.
you said you saw change like that because your world opens back up where...
Oh, you can breathe again. You feel
Exactly.
like, okay, I'm not hiding anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not ashamed of it.
Right.
I'm not ashamed of him.
Mm-hmm.
It was very difficult. It was a difficult life for him. And you know, there's days when I look and I think, I know what it was like being in my shoes as a parent.
Right.
What was it like being in his shoes?
Exactly, yeah.
Waking up every morning thinking, if I don't have what I need to keep myself normal, I am gonna be sick.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the truth of the matter.
Exactly, yeah.
Very, very sick. It's not a pleasure thing anymore.
Right.
It's simply maintaining a sense of normalcy so that they're not deathly sick.
Exactly, yeah.
Because I think when they start that detox and when they are sick, they'd probably just as soon be dead because that's how bad it feels.
Oh, yeah.
I can't say I know that from, it didn't happen to me.
Right.
I watched it happen.
Mm-hmm.
I learned, I listened, and it's a degree I really hadn't planned on.
Right, yeah.
Hard knocks.
Exactly. And just opening up to people and letting it go is so much better than keeping it all in. And I know you are doing a program at Corpus Christi.
I am.
Which I think is super important to talk about, because even if there's still a stigma around it, as much as we'd like to say like it's going to help if you let go, there's still people that are going to pull their prim down and walk by you in the grocery store or something like that. But
True.
I would love to have you talk about your meetings,
Yes.
how you conduct them, how they run. Everybody's welcome.
It was something that I had been thinking about for quite a while, but oftentimes it's hard to find a place that's willing to open their doors to you, affordable, because this isn't a thing that anyone's trying to, we don't want to see making money on something, but we just need a place for whoever, however many need to want to come together because we share this.
Right.
And I knew that Father Harrison at Corpus Christi had wanted to do something through the parish because he has seen this in action on a very regular basis. He has seen people with their children struggle. He's seen the individual struggle. He's seen people die. He has done many funerals in this department. And he wanted to do something but didn't have the fullness of the background of what it entailed, of how you would tackle this. And I got to see him more regularly, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes. I got to see him more regularly, and we began talking about it. And he realized I really wanted to try to bring people together who had the same concerns. And he wanted to do something within the parish. So it became a win-win situation. I have started a peer group. It's a peer group for those that have lost a loved one to addiction of one way or the other. I mean, it can be alcoholism as well. It doesn't have to just be heroin or opiates. It can be anybody who has worked, learned, lived the struggle, and lost someone. A loved one doesn't have to be only a child. It can be a sibling, it can be a friend, because there's an awful lot of young folks that are losing their whole friendship basis because they're going. So on Wednesday nights, on third Wednesday of every month at 6:30, we meet at the Corpus Christi Hall. And it's so far not a very big group. It's only been about a half a dozen people most of the time, not always the same half dozen. It kind of ebbs and flows. And we're there as a peer group. So the minute that anybody walks in the door who's in our shoes, we all understand. We don't have to try to impress anybody. We don't have to start from square one trying to explain, well, here's my story. We know the story is all the similar situation that we've all struggled. We've all been through an uphill and a downhill battle, and it is culminated in losing that person that we tried so hard to save. So it's just a place where we can come, we can share, we can talk about happy times, we can talk about having gone through the whole element. Ironically, after doing the 2 funeral services of my husband and my son, the director turned around and asked if I'd be interested in working for them. I am a funeral assistant.
Wow.
I greet at the door. I get the flowers to the church and the cemetery. I take care of the casket going up the aisle of the church. I comfort, and I'm just there for the folks.
Exactly, yeah.
Because I've been there.
Right.
And you know what? If I didn't do this job, it would be a sad place for me to drive by the funeral home. But it's not, because people say, how are you doing this kind of job? But you see, there's a whole sea of life around this one deceased person.
Exactly,
It really is. It's all about the families. That's what it really is.
Right. So third Wednesday of every month, 6 p.m.
6:30.
6:30 p.m.
to 8.
To 8, and it's Corpus Christi Hall.
Yes, at the Parish Hall, 324 Quaker Meeting House Road.
And
everybody is welcome. It's not just parishioners of Corpus Christi. This is open and welcome to anybody who wants to come. Doesn't matter the faith, doesn't matter the town.
And they can just sit there, they can listen if they want, they can speak if they want.
Exactly.
That's great. And that's to the right of the actual church, correct?
When you go to the church, it's to the left of the church.
To the left, okay.
Yes. Yes.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I hope that gets the word out. It was wonderful meeting you and talking to you. You're so positive, and I hope that people that talk to you, I know they feel the same way. I talked to Denise Cluden, and she was like, you have to meet Jeanne. Thank you so much for coming on. If you guys would like to learn more about this, there's plenty of resources online. I know there's no first time. Do you have any resources that you'd like to mention before that?
Well, there's so many different directions to go. And I mean, you can try to, I would say Parent Supporting Parents is one of the first places to consider. And that's Monday nights at 6:30 at the Chamber of Commerce over in Mashpee. Learn to Cope. Learn to Cope is a great organization. There's about 20 chapters in the state. There's one in South Yarmouth. I believe they meet at the police station. I'm not sure of the day. But, you know, certainly I think this is the only group that's on the Cape that I'm running right now for those that have lost somebody. And some people are ready to come and speak. Some people just share, just be there. And some people have a hard time really wanting to come out to that point. Everybody grieves at a different rate. But you know what? Life still goes on.
Exactly.
And there's a purpose. So as soon as you find that way to find out what your purpose is, I think that's what really it's all about.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much again.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It was a pleasure to have you. If you'd like to learn any more information about the film, you can just Google Paint the Eyes First. Thank you guys so much. And thank you, Jeanne.
You bet.